the design of mammals, which is super cool because it's quite different from human design. And maybe you're already thinking, like, aren't humans mammals? We are. However, there are some pretty obvious differences between you and your cat, you and your dog, you and your horse. One of the main differences I'd love to point out to you is your orientation to the earth, vertical or horizontal. Your dog is walking. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how to be a mammal walking across. Like, this is a person. It's got to be a blooper reel. Anyway, the way that your dog walks or your cat walks or your horse walks is not upright on two legs. They're not Puss in Boots. And so one of the things I want you to keep in mind as a primary difference between the mammalian design and the human design, even though humans are mammals, is the vertical component. What happens because we are more upright? Now, there are so many things that you could share about this. I think there are probably people who clicked on this video that are like, what do you mean mammal design? Like, what do you mean dog design? Like, my dog has a design. What is it? How do I figure it out? What does it mean? Like, Ra has some really good lectures on mammalian design, and I'm not going to spend the hours that Ra does talking about that. There's incredible source-based lectures. But when I talk about mammalian design, either online or to my students, a lot of times people are like, wait, hold up, what? Like, so often people don't even know that this is one of the things that you can look into. Now, when we run your chart, your body graph, there are two dates that create this quantum illusion that is you. But the date that we require you to know is your birthday, in particular, your birth time. From your birth time, we can go back 88 degrees, and that's going to give us our other set of numbers in order to make the calculation that makes the quantum that is you. Mammals are the same. So there is the birth date, the birth time that is the most relevant, and then it's calculated back from that. So in order to actually know your pet's design, because most people are going to look at this for their pets, it's not like just to know a mammal's design, but to know the mammals' designs that you care about, the mammals that have an aura that are affecting you in your life, or like animals that you feel very, very bonded with or very, very close to. It's so cool to look at them, what they are, and how they affect you or how you affect them. Now, I think it's kind of cool that for myself, I'm fortunate enough to have both of my dogs' birthdays and times. Both of my dogs are from breeders. They had the information. And I'll be honest, just because I ended up in the field that I did in the system of human design, I'm not surprised that I actually do know the birth times of my dogs and that I'm able to calculate this and it's able to be a part of like my education and my interest. I have a husky, and when I run his chart, he's a generator. And I have a corgi, and when I run his chart, he's a reflector. Okay, so not only in like I am a projector, I have a manifesting generator child, I'm in a relationship with a manifester, but also in my house, I have a generator dog and a reflector dog. Now, if you know your dog's birthday or your cat's birthday or your horse's birthday or any mammal's birthday that you want to run, when you actually get to see the graph that shows up, you might be either expecting it to look like a human body graph, or you might be like, I expect it to look completely different. You might be surprised to see that the mammalian body graph is a reduced version of the human body graph. The human body graph, if you look at your body graph, you are considered 9 centers in transitus. But when you run the mammalian design, there are only 5 centers available. But it's not like these are totally different centers from what we have. It's just that only 5 of what we have is accessed through the mammalian definition, and certainly not all gates and certainly not all channels. When you are 9 centered in transitus, you have the potential to activate currently in this point in time 64 different gates. Your dog, your cat, whatever, they don't have access to 64 different gates. In fact, they only have access to 18 of them. So I'm showing you the mammalian graph right now. The way that it's outlined in this program, genetic matrix, it's showing like a dog loosely shaped in the background. But one of the things I want you to see is that the human body graph has this almost like vertical. It looks as if it's upright, or maybe you don't even think about whether or not it's upright until you see the mammalian graph, and then you go, hold on, this thing fell over. It's as if the body graph went horizontal. That's one of the most significant things to look at in the information, is this difference between what appears to be vertical and what appears to be horizontal. If we're looking at the mammalian design, what I want you to, well, what I'm hoping is kind of obvious to you is an old point in evolution. Now, I'm going to use some examples of centers and the awareness centers to point this out. In the mammalian design, the only awareness center is the splenic center, and that's survival in the now. It's a very like instinctive, instinctual, intuitive. Instinctive and instinctual are basically the same word. Either way, it's really tapped into this in the now kind of survival thing. Humans are beyond that. Humans evolved from 5-centered to 7-centered, where we developed the ajna, which is a awareness center that has a cognition that functions over all time. And then eventually we became 9-centered and transitus with the development of the solar plexus, which is basically emotional intelligence in a wave. And eventually we will not just be 9-centered in transitus, we'll be the fully evolved 9-center. The solar plexus will be through its mutation, and it won't be awareness in a wave. It'll be an emotional awareness in the now beyond 2027. That was so many like cool little bits of information that aren't relevant, but are relevant to what we're talking about. Some good little breadcrumbs I left you there. Now, if we're in this place with the mammalian design where we're not having access to the solar plexus, we're not having access to the ajna, there's kind of this wonder of like, what kind of awareness is there and what kind of consciousness is there, and what's maybe the difference between the two? For an awareness, I'm looking at the splenic center. There's this awareness to survive in the now. But when I'm looking at consciousness, the mammal doesn't have the developed head and ajna. They're not thinking and processing in the same kind of way. However, these are still conscious beings in that there is a personality consciousness. I was listening to a really, really good lecture called Going Home, and it was basically about the Bardo experience when we die, how to separate the design and personality crystals so that the personality crystal can actually go back up into the bundles and have the ability to reincarnate as something else in the future. The design crystal, it basically gets recycled. It doesn't get used again. It's the personality crystal that can come back down and attach to another design crystal and have another incarnation. As I was listening to this lecture on Going Home and the Bardo experience, there was a question that kept coming up for me, which is, does this happen to the mammals? Do their personality crystals need to go back up into the bundles? Do they need to go through a Bardo experience? How long would a Bardo, does it last longer or shorter? Like, should I assume it's the same amount of time? Should I assume it's different? So there are lots of things that I'm curious about that I'm going to continue to research. But at the end of the lecture, Raw took a question from someone, and the question was, do the mammals go back up? As in, do they separate the personality crystal? Can the personality crystal go back up into the bundle? Do you want your animal, your pet, your loved creature to go through its Bardo experience? If it doesn't go through that, can it float around as this like mammalian rogue? Like, can my pet be a rogue crystal? I have so many questions. And I'll be honest, I'm actually amazed that I've managed to answer as many of them as I have, because so many of my questions, I just kind of like, I pose to myself, like I pose to the buyers. Like, it's just kind of like, I put that question out there. It shocks me how frequently the information finds its way to me. Throughout the whole Bardo lecture, I had the question of, what about the mammals? And that's the only question that got answered. And I loved that I got what I asked for. If you have a pet and you want to find out what their design is, you need to be able to run their chart, which means you need to be able to run their birth time. Not everybody has access to that information. Even if you know what day they were born, you could run that once an hour and look at it and get a loose idea. One of the next things that you might want to look at, though, is how do your pets condition you? Because there's a really good chance that your pet might have definition that you don't have. There's a really good chance that your pet has a hanging gait that makes an electromagnetic connection for you. My dog, Neo, the corgi, is a reflector. He's got a hanging gait 8. I've got a hanging gait 1. The electromagnetic that I make with my dog is a 1 to 8. It's a vocal channel. It's interesting to experience this with a pet. It's common, beginner, controversial, heretical advice that Raw gives that we're all supposed to sleep alone. He says you don't really live your experiment unless you sleep alone, because unless you know what it is to wake up as yourself, you don't really get anywhere in a system that's here to teach you about who you are if you don't do the things that teach you who you are. The point is to differentiate, but so many of us are so conditioned, so homogenized by not only other people or by transits and our pets, we rarely actually get to experience what we are when we're uninfluenced, when we're not being conditioned. Now, so many people are like, I don't want to sleep alone. I don't like that. I like to cuddle. I like my partner, like whatever the reason is. It's one thing to get people to sleep by themselves. It's another thing to get them to not sleep with their pets. So many people's pets have to sleep with them. I've been like quite like Neo, I don't let Cypress in my room when I sleep. I do not let Cypress in my room when I sleep. When the generator dog comes into my room for myself as the projector, I feel it. My feet start doing this underneath my blankets. I start to get fidgety. I start to wake up quite a bit and I just know it. I'll be like, Cypress, get out. And I watch my dog like get up and sneak out from somewhere in my room. And I'm like, I knew he was in here. And I feel bad, right? I'm not trying to send him away, but I want to wake up as myself. I want to be good the next day. I want to be regulated the next day. I'm not interested in being an exhausted, cranky pants because there are sacrals in aura with me when I'm sleeping. Like part of the sleep hygiene isn't just sleeping alone, it's sleeping without your pets too. Now, that being said, like I'm not a diehard who's like, I only do the right thing. Because if I only did the perceived right thing, it wouldn't give me the counter information for me to be able to actually trust the validity of what I'm learning. Like, Roth says sleep alone, so I'm going to sleep alone most of the time. And occasionally, I'm going to intentionally co sleep, whether it's with my son in a hotel room, or my partner at a family gathering, or my dog, because I just want to cuddle. And I just feel like it. You know, I just want to cuddle. There's something in it that and maybe afterwards I feel bad. Maybe afterwards I'm tired. Maybe I'm cranky. Maybe I didn't sleep well. Maybe I slept great. But either way, that's more information. Like, I'm a firm believer in this is an experiment, in particular for me. This is my experiment, right? I will only know the truth of the experiment based on the results of my own experiment. Even if they say, don't do this because this could happen, I'm like, well, let me test that. Third line. Let me prove that, ego. This is how I go about things. I totally cuddled with Neo for like 5 hours while I slept last night, and I loved it. Am I going to do it every day? No. Have I done it much over the last 2 years? Not even, right? Now, I have so much that I could say. Okay, so going back to this vertical horizontal thing. There's also something called the dream rave. It's like your sleep chart, the human design sleep chart. And basically what happens is when, as the human, you go horizontal, you go from vertical to horizontal, you revert back to your own mammalian design. Bear with me. You can run your own chart. I do this on Genetic Matrix. You can run your chart. And then you can go to sleep foundation. Your chart changes unless you sleep standing up, which most of us are assuming that you're not doing. Like there is an assumption that the sleep chart is for people who are laying down when they're sleeping, because the accuracy of when the sleep chart is activated isn't actually when you're sleeping. It's when you're horizontal. Forgive the vulgarity, but Ra says whether you're sleeping or you've gone into that version of yourself. He makes a joke about, do you like to get on all fours and bark like a dog? Like, there are ways to bring the mammalian, there are ways to bring the animal out in all of us. What is your mammalian design? If I look at my mammalian design, it shows up like a reflector. I don't stay a splenic projector. Of the 5 centers that can be defined, I don't have any of them defined. My sleep chart is a reflector. Am I actually a reflector? No. But is there something very important and specific about my programming that when I go this way, I'm meant to be influenced through the sleep chart a specific way? Yeah. So since we're on the topic of sleep, that's one of the questions that Ra asks right off the bat. Why do we sleep? Why do we need to sleep? Why do you need to go horizontal to turn into the mammalian version of yourself? What is the sleep chart? It's really interesting because like the question of, the mammalian design, in wanting to talk about what is the mammalian design, you have to end up talking about the human design and the sleep chart. You have to look at the awareness centers and what exists and what doesn't. You have to look at the actual centers and what exists and what doesn't. When I look at the mammalian design, I see my own evolution. I see a different way to understand part of my own history, but also an interesting like version of my experience, because when I go to sleep or when I lay down, something else very interesting is happening. I think one of the cool facts that I want to leave you with is if you have any idea about the stats in human design for how many types there are, what the percentage of types are, how many projectors are there, how many manifestors are there, how many sacral beings are there. Statistically, for humans, we got a ton of sacral beings. The generators and manifesting generators, they're more than 2/3 of the population. Like they're a huge percentage of the population. And as far as humans are concerned, reflectors, they make up 1% of the population until we lay down. Something very different happens when we lay down. The majority of mammals are reflectors, not sacral beings. Why is that? If you got questions after this, I do too. I know where to answer some of mine, but I'm going to keep looking, and I hope you do too.